So Bia, you mentioned that you had to, it's not for everyone, but you wanted to work, not because there was a need for an income, but because you wanted to find fulfillment. So building on that, I want to ask that you've done a lot of activism, first as within the Muslim community, then in the interfaith space, then to raise awareness on autism when your own grandson that you've mentioned was diagnosed with that condition. So like activism is at the heart of your narrative in the book as well. So is that also in search of fulfillment? What's the story behind that? Sabiha, the activist.
That was not in search of fulfillment. That was a need. So, for example, let's start with autism. Our grandson Umar, was diagnosed when he was had not yet turned 3 with autism, and I left my career. I was a hospital executive. I left my career to devote my life to addressing the needs of families with autism, but also to help ourselves. And I started a chapter of the National Autism Association in New York. To do that, I had to educate myself, I had to build a network, and then with a lot of support from mothers whose children had autism, we began to educate families who were affected by autism. We started advocating for the rights of children with autism. We created a resource bank for those who were looking for help to call and get help. We started writing about it. We were on the TV network to raise awareness about autism so that these children are not discriminated against. It was a need that drove me in that direction. But what came out of it was we started embracing disabilities. We embraced autism. We embraced the concept of special needs rather than fight it. And we came to the realization that our children may never recover, and we will have to live with this, and we should embrace this, and we should consider this as a blessing from Allah, who has given us this special child to open our hearts to those who have been affected by circumstance. And it just made us more compassionate and more accepting of Allah's will. And we look upon Omar as a blessing in our home, because he is innocent. He will always remain innocent. He has going to have the highest place in Jannah, and he lives in our house. So that is what
beautiful way to look at it.
Us. Yeah. Then, when it comes to activism in interfaith, it started off as a need for survival. It started off as a need for our children to feel confident in their faith. I did not want my children to come home from school and say, "Mom, why are the children calling me a terrorist?" So we knew that we had to raise awareness about this. And for that, we engaged in interfaith dialogue, going into communities of faith, of other faiths, talking about Islam, educating them about Islam, and learning from them about their faith as well, and bonding with them. And then when 9/11 happened, then Muslim community at large became more involved in activism, because they saw what happened as a fallout of 9/11 was that Muslims were not only discriminated against, there was violence against them. So that need for survival compelled us to become active in interfaith dialogue. And it served us well, because we built relationships so that when Trump got elected and Islamophobia went off the charts, reared its ugly head, these communities that we had built relationships came and stood by us, behind us, in front of us, shielded us, protected us, fought for us. And then we did the same for the Jewish community when they came under attack during the Trump administration. So it was all channeled by a particular need to react to a circumstance. And now it's become a way of life. Now that's all I do. All I do is my husband and I go all over the country giving talks on Islam 101, and people invite us. and listen to us, and we hear them out, they hear us out, and it's become our mission in life. I spend most of my time doing just that.
So Sabiha, while you're talking, I'm wondering, so you said you went to a home economics college, you were all set to be a housewife. And so what is it, because we're trying to explore thoughts into the minds of Pakistani authors. So I want to see, what is it in your mind, or what is it in your thought process that made you think, okay, this is a need and I am going to address it, as opposed to this is a need, why is somebody else not addressing it? So you took it in your own hands to say, okay, let me see what I can do about it. How can I build a community around it? So what is it that maybe your parents nurtured in you that help, or your, like, how does that come about? Because if you look at your trajectory, you're thinking, okay, she's all set to be a housewife. You've mentioned how you're from a loving family, very close to your father and all of that. So, but it's not every woman who's doing this, or every person who's doing the kind of work you're doing. So what is it that, what wheels turned in your head to sort of push you in that direction, do you think?
Yeah, so when it came to building a Muslim community where we lived in Staten Island in New York, my husband and I both felt that we need to do something. And we didn't, at that time, there was no Muslim community on Staten Island. We knew maybe one person, maybe two people. So there was nobody we could fall back on and say, well, let's outsource it to them. Maybe they can do it. We knew that it was up to us. And if we didn't do anything, who's going to do it? We are primarily responsible for our children. And then I also got support from my neighbors of other faiths who said, Sabiha, if you don't do anything, if you don't build a Islamic center for your children, do it for them. Don't do it for yourself. Do it for them. Who else is going to do it? And, so that sense of urgency and need is what pushed us to, all right, so how do we start? Okay, let's go through the telephone directory and see if we can find some Muslim names, and found two, who knew two more, who knew four others. And very quickly we had enough of a critical mass where we could at least have a gathering in our home of Muslims so that our children see other Muslims around them. And that eventually then, okay, so why don't we start a school? We don't have teachers. Okay, so we have to become teachers. Oh, but we don't know anything. We are totally ignorant. Let's learn. Can you get me a book? You're going to Pakistan. Can you please bring me elementary books? And that is.
Do you think other Muslims with young children were also responding to that vacuum in the same way as you did? So there was something unique about you.
Yeah, in varying degrees. There was, as in any community, there is a core that takes the lead, and it wasn't just me and my husband. There were other family community members who had strong leadership skills. Somebody was good at speaking. Somebody was good at organizing. Somebody, had the means to buy a place. So there was a core group that led this effort, and everybody else was afraid. What happens if our children don't become good Muslims? Supported that effort.
Was common.
That was common. So that was common, and like anywhere else, you need core leadership and you need followers. And if you have a message that resonates, we are doing this for our children to become good Muslims, you will have a following. But you need people who can spearhead the effort, who can put the time and energy that it takes. I always had leadership skills. I mean, even in college, I was, in positions. So I had that in me. My husband had it in me. And so that is what put us in that position where we could, and then that is what took me into autism. I knew that I have the ability to start up something, and if I can get enough support, can do it alone, then you can pull it off.
So you were a mover and a shaker always, yeah? In some sense.
I tried to move things, I tried to shake things, but it was the support of people that made it happen. Nothing can be done alone. It takes a village. It takes all kinds to make things happen.
True. In the story you've mentioned that I mean, you're a trailblazer in many ways, but also today we see there are so many women on the leadership committees, organizing committees of Islamic centers. And in your narrative, in your memoir, you mentioned how when you opted for that option, there was so much opposition from women themselves. So, and yet in that environment when nobody else was doing it, you were ready to do it. So in some sense, I can feel that we can look at this memoir from a feminist lens also. Would you identify yourself as a feminist or as a Muslim feminist, or do you see this narrative as a powerful way to say, look, Muslim women are not all suppressed and subjugated to torture, and they can be doing these wonderful things as well? I'd like your comment on that.
Such a good question. Thank you for that. I don't, from my perspective, I choose not to label myself as belonging to a particular movement or a category, feminist, not feminist, liberal, conservative. I don't, I prefer not to label myself because that boxes me in. And by getting labeled, then you're expected to have certain characteristics for sure and not have others for sure. And if you don't meet that definition, then you don't belong in that category. So we are across the spectrum. We are all different. We all have a little bit of something and not enough of the other. And therefore, I don't call myself a feminist or anything for that matter. I have certain points of view that keep shifting, and I have certain pursuits that keep shifting. So, but getting back to the idea behind feminism, which is, you know, the rights of women, I am all for that. There are places where I will, you know, draw the line. So let's take Malala Yousafzai as an example. She just got married, and the tabloids are cracking down on her. They are criticizing her. Those who claim to be liberal feminists are saying, how could she marry at this age? Someone is saying she should have married a British man. She should have waited until she was 30. She is too young.
Wow.
She's, you know, so this is today's news. And it's in Dawn.
Wow.
It's in Dawn. And they've been tweeting about it. And my response is, she made a choice, and she has the right to make a choice. She made a choice to get married. She made a choice who she gets married to. She is happily announcing her marriage. Let's not box her into how we define the contours and boundaries of feminism. I applaud her. I'm happy for her. She wanted to get married, she got married. And that is what, to me, the women's rights is all about. It is the freedom to make choices, the freedom to make decisions that affect you. I am totally in support of the movement taking place in Pakistan by women's organizations who are asking for freedom from domestic violence, freedom from sexual harassment in the workplace and other places, higher and better wages for women, particularly those from the rural areas, their access to healthcare, their literacy. All of those are part of this movement that I support with all my heart. Aurat March, yes, it gets attention. It gets attention. You want to take to the streets, take to the streets. You want to dance in the streets, fine with me. And I wish that the police would give them the protection that they deserve and they need when they are out there marching in the streets. But I do have an opinion on some of the posters that were upheld, which I felt were perhaps not dignified. And if we want to get attention to our rights, we should do it with dignity so that we don't dilute our cause.
I think part of the thinking behind it was also to get attention, but I think they got the wrong kind of attention and they kind of damaged the cause also by being overly provocative. We were talking about this otherwise also, like things like go warm your own food, or about women's right to sit like men sit, etc.
Like the sitting like men sit is what really I found offensive, and I felt that it hurts their cause. There's so much that we need out there that is so much more important. Fight for those rights that I just listed. And when it comes to warming the food, work it out. Work it out with your spouse. Yeah. So I think that, and I hail the accomplishments of the women in Pakistan. They have, when I look at what they've accomplished compared to what I have accomplished here, not in terms of women's rights, but more in terms of other things, I am rolling pebbles compared to the mountains that women in Pakistan are moving. And against many, many odds. They have succeeded in criminalizing killing of women. Honor killing, families would get away with it because they would forgive.
Right.
And that was with the push of women, that was then murder was made a criminal act where the family is now out of the equation and it's the state versus the killer.
The murderer.
Huge step forward. And the women used religion to counter, the penal code against women for adultery, because the Quran says you need 4 witnesses. And these punishments were carried out in the absence of that. So they were able to reverse that aspects of Zia's penal code. And then again, don't give the extreme right an opportunity to weaponize your cause. I mean, those posters at the Orange March, they then became a source of weaponization by the extremists, and then videos were doctored and
right.
So
but it's a long journey.
It's a long journey, and it starts at home. It starts at the conversations that parents have with one another at the dining table. It's favoring boys versus girls in the families. It's how the husband is treating his wife. That is what the children absorb. You don't even have to be telling them anything. They just absorb that from the home environment. It's what the teachers are telling the children in the schools, or how they're treating them in the schools. It starts over there. You can't take a 35-year-old man and change his points of view. It all starts at an early age. So women, and more so than men, because they are the nurturers, need to start inculcating these values in their little boys, so that they grow up respecting women. Just start with respect. Domestic abuse has no place. No place in society, no place in Islam. And we don't want to expose our children to that. It starts in the home.
Right.
We can make all the laws. We can make all the laws in the world. But unless the mindset changes, the courts are only a means of last resort.
And the law only steps in when things have gone wrong. That's kind of too
late. It's too late. Yeah, it's last resort, and not everybody goes to the courts to seek redress.
Yeah, totally.